This is biryani, by far India's favorite food. Every part of India has their own unique spin on it, and it tastes best when you get it from a local roadside restaurant like this. This is a proper working class dish, made in large pots to feed huge crowds, flavored with strong local spices and chilies, slow cooked meat, and tons of rice. This is Pilau, and it's what biryani originally used to look like. This dish originated all the way here in Persian Iraq, in the royal kitchens of the Abbasid Caliphate. It's delicately flavored with saffron, dry fruits, and nuts, and except for maybe the rice, this dish looks and tastes nothing like this. So, what I want to know is, how did the food of Persian royalty in Iraq become the food of the common man in India? And here's the thing, you could say that about almost all the foods brought to India by Muslims. From kebabs to tandoor, from faluda to jalebi, Muslim cuisine in India has had a long and fascinating journey from the sumptuous kitchens of Islamic rulers to the humble mom and pop shops lining the gullies of Old Delhi. There's a common thread that binds all those Persian delicacies to the chicken tikkas and mutton kebabs of today. The Mughals. I want to take you on a journey that spans centuries and empires, where we see how Indians used to eat and drink before Islam arrived, and how these once foreign invaders gradually became so intertwined with Indian life and culture that eventually they spawned an entirely new culinary experience. The thing you'd probably find the most surprising about ancient Indian food is how much meat we used to consume. Over 2500 years ago, Indians didn't really have any of the cultural stigma that's now associated with eating animals, and we used to quite happily consume sheep, goats, pigs, buffaloes, even peacocks. But weirdly, chicken was actually quite disliked, and we didn't eat eggs that much either. Today, Indians love eating meat cooked in a tandoor oven, but back then, people used to just roast the meat over an open flame or fry it in oil or boil it in a kind of stew or curry. This was obviously way before the introduction of chilies by the Portuguese, so we'd either use black pepper or more commonly long pepper to give the food some kind of heat. Also, I kind of feel like we lost a bit of subtlety in our palate once we got chilies. Ancient Indians would regularly use stuff like mangoes, pomegranates, tamarind, and a whole variety of local spices that have kind of been forgotten once we settled on the modern blend of chili, ginger, garlic, and masalas. We really need to bring back the concept of using seasonal and hyper-local fruits and veggies in our cuisine. Why keep eating the same things all year long when you can get unique flavors in the summer, monsoon, and winter? But anyway, the Indian culinary landscape began to shift in a major way around 2300 years ago when Buddhism and Jainism really began to pick up some momentum. You see, these religions taught a dramatically new way of life with their foundational concept of ahimsa or non-violence. That meant no hurting or killing animals, not even for food, but on a more personal level, only consuming food that elevated your higher senses, not your carnal instincts. This is where we got the concept of tamasic, rajasic, and sattvic food. Tamasic foods are those that heighten your animalistic tendencies like lust and anger, and it was believed that alcohol, meat, garlic, and onions made us feel those strong emotions. Rajasic was very spicy or salty food that gave you energy but also disturbed your calmness. And finally, sattvic food were those that gave you lightness and stability of mind and soul. Fresh fruits, vegetables, whole grains, milk, nuts, and honey are all sattvic. Buddhism and especially Jainism promoted a more sattvic lifestyle, but that's actually not the interesting part. See, both these new religions specifically targeted urban Indian elites, people who had money, resources, and were willing to donate to religious causes. So, as thousands of these people migrated to Buddhism and Jainism, Hindu temples began to lose the loyalty of some of their wealthiest patrons. With the survival of their very religion on the line, Hindu scholars had to adopt many of the newfangled principles of Buddhism, and food was a huge part of this. Over the years, vegetarianism began to be associated with purity and God, and Brahmins who used to eat meat began to avoid it to achieve a sattvic lifestyle. I find this kind of funny because Buddhist majority countries like Thailand and Cambodia have heavily meat-based diets, But there's a whole bunch of reasons for that which I won't get into here. Suffice it to say that as the centuries progressed, Indian diets grew increasingly vegetarian, especially in the Vedic heartland of North India. Even if it never became the majority practice, it was and still is common to abstain from eating meat in certain times of the week or year. This is not normal, by the way. It's a phenomenon completely unique to India. We've always been one of the most densely populated regions on earth, and yet a significant chunk of our population made a completely voluntary decision based on religion to partially or totally avoid eating meat, which is unheard of anywhere else in the world. It's no wonder then that when Muslim rulers arrived in India, they weren't just confused, they were downright frustrated with how different this new land was. Like when Babur, the first Mughal emperor, arrived in India, he was shocked at how little meat or bread the locals ate. Indians mostly ate cooked grains like barley and rice, and the exotic fluffy breads that are so popular in Central Asia were basically unheard of here. More than anything else, he was extremely disappointed at the lack of fruits in the market. Babur was from Uzbekistan, which is famous for growing an amazing variety of fresh melons, apricots, grapes, figs, and lots of other fruits, most of which were not so widely available in India. In fact, the Mughals were so obsessed with fruits that they used to spend huge amounts on growing and importing them, and gave them as special gifts to their most esteemed guests. I sometimes wonder if the Indian tradition of gifting dry fruits and nuts came from this Mughal custom. But anyway, Babur was not impressed with what he saw in Indian bazaars and markets. He even complained in his memoir, "There's no good flesh, no grapes or muskmelons, no good fruits, no ice or cold water, no good food or bread in the bazaars." Oh, and that's another thing. Nobody had heard of ice and chilled water in most parts of India. The Mughals, who originated in the frigid Central Asian steppe, had pretty easy access to ice from the mountains, which they harvested during the winter and kept in highly insulated ice houses called yakchals. When summer rolled around, these yakchals would keep the ice stored for months without melting, no refrigeration required. Persians were able to enjoy ice-cold desserts and sherbets even in the peak of summer, something which the rest of the world had to wait another 1,000 years for. In India, the Mughals had to improvise somewhat. They'd place bottles of water in pots containing saltpeter and water. When they stirred the mixture, it caused an endothermic reaction which chilled the bottle of water, giving the emperor a nice cooling refreshment at all times of the year. They even had runners who would bring fresh ice all the way from the Himalayas when they were in their court in Lahore in present-day Pakistan. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Long before the Mughals arrived on the scene, most of North and West India were ruled by the Delhi Sultanate, a series of Persian conquerors from Iran, Afghanistan, and Central Asia. These sultans were India's first proper introduction to Islamic rule and culture, and they brought with them the food of their homeland. Let me show you what it would be like to dine at the palace of the Delhi Sultan at the time of Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Hundreds of dishes would be cooked daily in the royal kitchens, from kebabs made with ground meat infused with spices to soft bread cooked in tandoors, large cuts of mutton, halim, pilau, keema, sweet cakes, halwas, and lots more. Their specialty was the sambosak, a fried pastry filled with minced meat, almonds, walnuts, pistachios, onions, and spices. Yeah, this was the original samosa. Indians would later modify it into a vegetarian version with a spicy potato filling. Muslim royals had to follow elaborate dining rituals that began in the very kitchens. Before the food was served, it would be tasted by a royal taster to ensure nothing had been poisoned. Meanwhile, the Sultan and his guests sat at a dastarkhan, basically a long cloth spread on a table. You had to sit according to your rank, with the most important courtiers like judges and orators sitting closer to the head of the table. Servants would bring pitchers of water and basins so that guests could wash their hands, and served individual portions of food to each person. The more important you were as a guest, the more dishes you were served. Finally, the chamberlains would serve a sherbet of sugar water and utter Bismillah, which signaled that you could now begin eating. Once you were done, you'd wash it down with a barley drink called fukka, and chamberlains would utter Bismillah once more to conclude the meal. Of course, most people weren't eating at the Sultan's palace. If you were poor and couldn't afford a meal, or you were a traveler in the city, you could always get a free meal at the local langar run by Sufi saints. Here, you could eat a simple but hearty meal of rice, khichdi, naan, meat soup and curd. It should be clear to you by now that India was already pretty well acquainted with the concept of Persian and Islamic cuisine well before the time of the Mughals. So, why is it that we always associate Muslim food with Mughalai cuisine? The thing is, the Mughals did something that no other Islamic rulers had ever really done before. They synthesized their Persian roots with their new Indian homeland to form a completely unique Indo-Persian culture. You can see it in everything from their architecture to their art to their customs and, of course, their food. The Mughal Emperor Akbar fell in love with Indian culture. He banned the slaughter of cows for the sake of his Hindu subjects and practically became a vegetarian. He believed the Ganga river held sacred powers, calling it the water of immortality. And no matter where he was, he would make sure to have a supply of water from the Ganga transported to him on camels or caravans so he could drink it. He was also fascinated by the sheer variety of spices available in India and staffed his royal kitchens with several Indian cooks. Now this is where things got interesting. The kitchens of the Mughal Empire were like a laboratory of food, where Persian cooks from Baghdad and Indian cooks from all over the subcontinent collaborated to invent Indo-Persian fusion food. Besides synthesizing the different cuisines by creating new dishes, Mughalai cuisine brought together the cookery of Central Asia, Persia and Hindustan by combining different dishes from each of these traditions in one meal. Persian cooks prepared sugar-coated almonds, pastries and quince jams, while Indian cooks made pickles and chutneys, sweet limes, curds and green vegetables. These accompaniments of varied provenance were served with the main dishes to create a Mughalai meal. Dishes like pilau and kebab, which were delicate and subtly flavored, were now being given a whole new spin with strong Indian spices like cardamom, cinnamon, turmeric, pepper and ginger. Persians did this thing where they'd marinate meat in yogurt before cooking it in an oven. Under the Mughals, that yogurt marinade was infused with all these spices, so the resulting dish was elevated to a whole new level. This is the same technique used to cook your favorite chicken tikka masala. It's hard to understate how famous and culturally influential the Mughals were in their time. They were like the superstar celebrities of late medieval India. They had more wealth than any other kingdom in the country and they weren't afraid to flaunt it. The Mughal court was an opulent, dazzling display of the empire's reserves of gold, gemstones and precious materials. Their palaces were massive and richly decorated. Hell, even their tombs are wonders of the modern world. They had armies of over 1 million soldiers and thousands of war elephants, and when they traveled, they would bring their entire imperial kitchen with them. Hundreds of coolies carrying food, cookware and supplies would follow the emperor, along with dozens of cows to provide fresh milk every day and hundreds of animals to slaughter for meat. Just imagine being an ordinary peasant in some small village in North India and watching a procession of that scale pass by your home. The sight would have been simply unreal. The Mughals became famous across the world for their ostentatious displays of wealth, and even to this day, the word Mughalai is synonymous with luxury and richness. But it was this very trait that would ultimately lead to their downfall. It began with Shah Jahan, who practically emptied the Mughal coffers, building outrageously expensive palaces and monuments. And it was made worse by his son Aurangzeb, who conquered so much territory that he destabilized the empire and made powerful enemies. After Aurangzeb's death, major vassal rulers began to break away from the empire and form their own semi-independent states, and many of them sought out chefs trained in the Mughalai way of cooking for their own personal kitchens. The Nawabs of Lucknow adapted Mughalai cuisine to create their own culinary style, which was heavier on cream and saffron. It was here that Awadhi cooks invented the concept of dum pukht, a technique of slow cooking rice, meat and spices in a sealed vessel, allowing the aromas and flavors to seep deep into every grain of rice, creating the famous Awadhi biryani. In Hyderabad, royal cooks used local ingredients of the Deccan like curry leaves, tamarind and chilies to create dishes like the fiery Hyderabadi biryani. And it wasn't just the rich nobles who did this. Ordinary citizens were fascinated with stories of the Mughal kitchens and their legendary feasts, and they copied Mughalai recipes in their own homes and restaurants, bringing palace cuisine to the streets and into the plates of everyday Indians. Over the years, Muslim cuisine in India has gone from a somewhat foreign delicacy to a completely intrinsic part of Indian food. Whether that's Malabar Parota and Talasari Biryani in Kerala, or Keema, Halim and Hyderabadi Biryani in Hyderabad, or Galoti Kebab and Lucknowi Biryani in Lucknow, Kolkata Biryani, Awadhi Biryani, Donne Biryani, Ambur Biryani, Bombay Biryani. Today, the Mughal influence on food is why Indians love using almonds, pistachios, dates and raisins in our sweets, which back then had to be specially imported from Persia. It's why we love tandoori food, which did exist in India before Islam, but it was the sultans and Mughals who really popularized it for making roti, naan, kebabs and tikka. And once the Europeans introduced brand new ingredients like chilies, cashews, potatoes and tomatoes from South America, it opened up an entirely new world of possibilities for what we could do with veggies, meat, spices and fire. And honestly, that's an equally fascinating story because more than half of all Indian food we eat today features an ingredient that we only got around 200 years ago. You'd honestly be shocked how much Indian food has evolved in just the last century. I know I was because I went and made a whole video about it where I talk about how India's most famous foods from Rajma in the north to Masala Dosa in the south only exist because of European colonialism. It's a story about food and politics and how modern India's culinary landscape is transforming as we speak. Click here to watch that video right now. Please support my channel by liking this video, get subscribed and become a channel member to get early access to videos and exclusive content. It really helps me keep making videos like this. Thanks so much for watching and I'll see you in the next one.